Hey guys, what's up? I'm Paper Skies, and today we're going to be doing a super requested breakdown of my track Fold. Let's get right into it.
Don't confine me to your lucid findings. Yeah, I'm tired of trying to break the fall.
So, starting off, the first thing that I want to break down is the main sound that was really used to just put this whole track together and kind of come up with the foundation of it. And it's actually off to the side of the project file here. This was the original idea for Fold. It doesn't sound great. It sounds pretty out of key. But I got some cool sound design stuff out of it by just really resampling like crazy. I took this one bass from a sample pack that I had done through my old record label 04 Collective here. So sounding kind of cool on its own, and then put it through all of this processing here that I'm not really going to bother explaining too much, but a whole lot of stuff going on. So once that got all resampled, I just put it through an Edison, did a bunch of post cleanup stuff on it, put it through another Edison and cleaned it up, and then got this kind of as my result. Brought it down 12 semitones with a format shifter. And layered together, it makes kind of like a cool 8-bitty sound. That was kind of the main inspiration for the track. It started off with that, and then this little drum pattern here. Ended up writing this melody on top of it, and it just flew. So the next sound being the lead, this whole track was just a whole bunch of fun, like resampling and doing things like that. This was a shark snare, and it's called shark snare here for some reason, but I can assure you it's not a shark snare. What it is in the same 04 Collective pack under the Joe B samples. I took this one kind of like really screechy taro bass, and then just pitched it up and did some processing to shorten it up through Edison, and got this cool sound. Kind of sounds like, I don't know, someone with like basketball shoes on like a gym floor squeaking around. And then made a melody out of it just by pitching it around. And I had two instances, one that's kind of shorter and one that's a little bit longer in terms of the tail, and just switched between those. So this sound here, which is used to fill up a bit of the mid space, since the highs were pretty isolated and the lows were pretty isolated by the sub, is actually just a VR pad from his contact library, gone through a whole bunch of processing with phasers and such to try and get kind of a new flowing sound. Altogether with the sub, we've got this. I also forgot to mention at the start of this recording that this project file is extremely laggy, so the first original playthrough you heard was actually a secret MP3 file that I just threw down at the bottom because it's going to be a tough one. Moving to our little Jersey section, I knew that I wanted it to be a little bit more dry and a little bit more open, doesn't need to have all those elements filling up the space. So what I did was just got some atmospheres kind of waving around in the background, and a bunch of ambiances and drums to fill up the space rather than a bunch of basses, and it helps kind of make like a nice A-B section where you have this more hard-hitting, totally filled up space, and then the secondary space, which is pretty light and just easy to jump around to, I guess. The drum layers here include a kick, some open and close hi-hats, and I got this weird like open cymbal that I'm kind of just throwing around. And together those add like a nice flow. Then this kind of glass sound. This was just taken from a super big like wind chimey sounding thing here. That was ear piercing. Crashes, and then finally a bed squeak, because that's iconic for Jersey. That's the first half of the first drop. Now the second half, you get this kind of pulling effect. Left a bunch of cool crystallizer effects on in this take with the Edison to kind of differentiate it from the first one. And then in the second B part here, we've got some new sounds that come in the second half. This is just tons more pads with a bass layer under it, and they're kind of just playing this little plucky melody with all these tiny little hits in between to just add some nice transients. And you'll probably notice in a lot of my tracks, I have a whole lot of these like phaser-y sounding movements. For me, at least, when it comes to the whole color-based genre, I get a lot of my cool textures out of just abusing phasers like crazy and using them on tons of sounds wherever I can. And in this case, I'm just using a serum effects on top of these pads, which before processing is sounding like this. And then after processing, which is like 3 separate chains, we get this. Then to get in that cool pull-in effect, there's a little tape stop here that plays, and it just lets the sound kind of like wind inwards instead of just starting off the bat. This is the same pacer sound that I showed off in my Broken video. If you want to see how it was made, you can definitely check it out there. This kind of helps keep the flow and keep everything in rhythm. Now, transitioning over to the second drop, I took that little rapid fire bass that I called, and just looped it over and over again with an ARP and some new elements coming in, bringing back some of the old little chonky sounds that we made. First thing is manipulating the lead again, bringing it back but having it play the new melody on top of the plucks that are coming in. I've created these tonal kind of sine waves by just really boosting a sine, giving it a lot of attack and a pitch envelope so that it like feels very transient heavy. And then you can hear me working with a crystallizer to get in those cool crystally sounds that fade in during the later half as background noise. And then also some delay that kind of just creates that nice panning pluck effect afterwards. The whole idea for this was just try to make it as like ear candy satisfying as possible, really wide, really textured, and have it flow nicely into this section here as kind of like a background element. These little air hits that I mentioned earlier are hitting on every first beat, and then in the second half just keeping that pace the same way as earlier. We're bringing back our cool chunky sound bass once again, being used throughout the whole track. Except this time, I'm kind of taking small elements of it and just rearranging it in a way that it wasn't too intended to be, but helps a lot with the flow. And adding some transients in the second half. We've got our atmospheres and our chimes in the background from the Jersey half being reused. And they're now way grittier bass when compared to the first drop. How this bass was made was actually using 3x oscillator. The power of a saw wave with white noise through distortion is absolutely broken, and if you haven't discovered it yet, then here's your free gold. Those two sounds together without any processing sound like this. Then what I'm doing is putting it through some distortion, which right away is going to give it that grittiness. And anything that you put before the distortion on this type of bass is almost going to just shape the sound and give it a different tonality or timbre, if that is the correct term. I'm probably super wrong. I'm using a OTT and a disperser, playing them one at a time. That's what it sounds like. And anytime you change any of these parameters, it completely changes the sound. I hope I don't break it, but let's remember E4, 334 hertz. E4. That was right. After, I've got it going through a serum effects with a phaser filter. Again, more phasers just to give more crazy movement. And that's what this automation clip down here is doing. then just some cleanup stuff, an EQ, an imager, and then another compressor just to make sure everything's nice and put together. Very cool. That about does it for this drop. It's really just a lot of changes in melody, some articulation, and besides that, you've got the whole idea basically down. Moving into the breakdown, we've got a lot of things going on here. Starting with the drums, Foley, percussion, all that good stuff, we've got a whole lot of layers here. These are just samples that I've collected over time. I wish I could pinpoint all the packs that they're from, but if you're looking for a cool alternative, I know Direct and Mr. Bill have some amazing new packs that they dropped recently with insane drums, insane Foley, and with my recent songs, not with Fold though, I've just been absolutely abusing those packs, so would highly recommend. And I tried to get this loop to be changing over time. All of the different instances of these sounds are usually unique samples that have slight different changes in volume and panning and things, just to help it feel not so loopy and a bit more inconsistent throughout the whole track. Doing the same tactic that I did with Broken here with like the waves coming up and then quickly dipping down to add to the flow. The main one being our first bass. I didn't give this bass a whole lot of high end, and the reason for that was so all the other elements on top of it could stand out a little bit more. I didn't want it being the main focus, but almost just like the driving back end of this cool layer that I ended up adding above that sounds like this. What this sound is nothing actually too complex in its root. It's just a saw wave with unison 9 going through a randomized wavetable that I've created by just right-clicking on Harmor here and hitting randomize, and then going through a lot of post-processing. That includes some more serum effects, phaser stuff, a LFO tool which is giving it the movement, a lot of reverb effects, and then a whole bunch of panning and vocodecs and cleanup to give it that like wide yet like watery, squishy kind of sound. In the background, I've got these like signature bells that I've been using in all my songs. Crystallizer is bringing up that sparkly effect in the back. I found this cool contact library called DAC Sim, I think that's how you say it. And it has a whole bunch of these cool like foreign instruments that sound very like cultural and everything. This one in particular, this Dudica vibrato, is super nice and super clean. I've been trying to find ways to use it in my music. It's kind of tough, I guess, in certain instances, but worked out really well here. And by putting a shimmer on this with the preset Deep Blue Day, in other words, just bringing up the diffusion a little bit more and the shift 12 semitones, so it's like an octave up, you can get this really nice like outer pad kind of effect that comes a little bit later on and might just add to the ambience and the cool sparkly noises that are already happening.
I've been searching for so long.
Well, I do have a vocal take now for the next build up. In the project, I actually did all the vocal processing separate just to make sure that I wasn't working with all this lag and I can hear everything properly. Sekai actually did hold that last note where he says fold. It wasn't stretched, it wasn't moved or anything. He just held the note the whole time, so big up Sekai, that was huge. I wanted this build up to feel super atmospheric and just be a whole bunch of cool sounds, almost like some big jet or spaceship was starting up in the future. So I tried to layer just as many cool stereo textures and elements as I could here. It kind of progressively gets more and more distorted and broken as it goes on. There's a glitch 2 envelope that's giving it that offbeat kind of sound, which almost adds to the drums and gives it a bit more pacing, since it felt like the build was lacking a bit of a consistent, like 1, 2, 3, 4. It was kind of all fading out into one big atmospheric pad by the end of it. I love this little space guy that's talking here. I've been using samples like these in all of my music since the start, I think. Just like old vintage movie vocals and things like that.
Approaching 530 miles due west. We confirm inboard cutoff.
And finally we get to the last drop, which is essentially the second one, or a lot of elements from it, and replacing the kind of big, what I call it, the clunky sound that we used with a bunch of chord stacks, since that seems to be a Paper Skies classic. They just go with the chords. I will be doing a video to break down my chords at some point. I don't think this is my cleanest example that I've done, but regardless, they can get pretty big, sometimes pretty small. It's all about the exact sound that you're trying to achieve and the amount of layers that you need to achieve that sound. But the basics of this one is 2 angry saw layers, which are kind of like my top notes. A basic saw with just like a quick pitch envelope for some transients. A bunch of atmospheres. Clean saws. A wider bass to fill up the wide, low, mid space. And then more of a mono bass to fill up the low end mono. And then my sub. Alright, now we move to the outro, but warning, a lot of the files are kind of broken and not loaded properly, and basically this project is a huge mess. But what I had originally was some quick plucks that were playing and just hitting very nicely with the chords. The plucks from earlier. Some pads with some glitch effects on them. And a little reverb that comes in when they're not playing to help fill up the space. Our bass layer. And then all of the respective drum layers. And some tonal snares on top of the snares that are pitched around to actually be hitting in key of the chord that's going on. And that's basically it. That's Fold. So if there's anything in this project that I didn't get to that you wanted to see, feel free to comment below, and I'd be happy to try and answer all the questions that I can. I have a new song called Daydream that I haven't teased at all yet anywhere. If you're watching this the day this video comes out, you're the first person to hear about it, and it's coming out next Friday. So I hope you guys are excited for that. I'll hopefully do another breakdown for that one a little earlier than I did for Fold. I know I kind of waited a little bit on this one, but hope everyone's been doing well. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one. Adios.